Welcome into the Husker247 podcast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Michael Bruntz, Brian Christopherson. We are Husker247. And Nebraska is 1-0. Bruntz, do you have that 1-0 feeling? Do you remember what that was like to cover a team that started 1-0?
Vaguely. It's been a while, but 24-hour rule, as you know, we're on to the next one. But yeah, it was weird. It was weird waking up that first Sunday and not having a message board on fire. It was a nice change.
Yes. Could get used to that. We're going to extend the 24-hour rule. I don't want to count the hours. I'm not good at math, but we're extending it just so we can hear what BC has to say about Nebraska versus UTEP. He did not join for the post-game podcasts, but that doesn't mean we don't want his thoughts on that game. So we're gonna see what Brian had to say. I'm gonna ask you about a few things, and you give me your thoughts on them specifically. We're gonna start with the defense. What did you feel about what Tony White's group accomplished on Saturday?
Solid. I thought it was B+, A- type performance. You held them to 205 yards. I didn't think there was a major drop off when the backups came in. They got away with a couple things. There was one late where I think it was Sierra Wright fell down, and that could have been like a 45-yard touchdown and, stuff like that. But for the most part, I thought the tackling was sound, even though Matt Rhule, I think, threw a little fish food into the water on Monday and said, that could have been better. Some stuff to correct there. But for a first game, I thought that was pretty put together. And I think some guys who some people might say, I think I know what this guy's about, had good games, like Ty Robinson, MJ Sherman, Mekhi Bayer. Those are the three that come to my mind that I thought played really well and maybe exceeded some expectations people have of them.
Yeah. We'll keep stringing this along. Special teams.
That was good. I mean, aside from Hull's, first kickoff, which went out.
Jitters there, maybe.
Yeah, that was like me I told you this. This is like me on the tee box, where there's all this space to your right and there's a lake on the left. And you somehow hit it in the lake. So that was unfortunate. But he rebounded. And I thought Buschini hit it really well. They should have blocked a punt, actually. I guess it was Elliott Brown, I think, who almost had it.
Very close.
And the punt return operation looked like there was effort involved in moving it north-south, which is encouraging.
All right. Now we can get to maybe the most fun part, the offense. You got eyes on Dylan Raiola. You'd seen him at practice. You saw him in the spring game. What was it like seeing him in a regular season game and some of those throws that he was able to make? What do you think that does for Nebraska's offense moving forward?
Yeah, you want to be careful to not overdo it. But then on the first series, when it's 2nd and 30 and you're thinking back to a year ago where you're like, man, Nebraska should have just punted on 2nd down in that situation in 2023. And he throws 19 yards easy to Banks, takes what they get. And then sort of the side angle, funny arm angle throw to Nair that looked a little Mahomes-like. I mean, it's hard to control it a little bit yourself. You're like, this is going to be fun. And then the strike to Banks before the half, Banks obviously made a great play, but that's also a QB just putting it right where it's supposed to be. I thought his first touchdown pass to Nair was magical in the sense that it wasn't just like a 12-yard pass to a tight end or something. It was one of those that everyone came to see. Had a great call by Benetti on the Fox broadcast about him dropping it in. It just had the whole package. And then I think you saw the combination too, how his receivers can help him out. There was a play on the drive right before the half ended where Nair catches a pass that's behind him and high, gets 14 yards. And it was sort of just like, oh, that's routine. It wasn't. It wouldn't have been a catch last year by anybody in Nebraska's receiving operation, I don't think. And it was now. And so that was pleasant for the eye.
I'm glad that you said that about Benetti. I really enjoy him as a broadcaster. That's someone that's moved
up. He's a great
baseball
announcer too.
Oh, yeah. When he does the Fox game of the week and Cleveland plays, it's really good. Normally I'm stuck watching the local chuckleheads with Cleveland, and so shout out for Jason Benetti. Very good at what he does. Last thing, was there a player or two that surprised you, either good or bad, from Saturday?
I don't know that there was somebody that surprised. I'll just say the offensive line as a whole, I'll kind of cheat here. It felt like for a first game, they were moving the line of scrimmage like you want them to. And I know people can throw their hand at that and say, well, it's UTEP. But we've seen Nebraska play teams that they're supposed to just manhandle because of size and all that. And it's been really hard sometimes running the ball, especially early in the game in some past seasons. And it just felt like when they wanted to run, they were getting 4 or 5 yards early on, and they were just sort of enforcing their will. So I thought that was impressive. I think Luke Lindenmeyer is worth a shout out. Like, he's one of those guys everyone will gloss over. Had the highest grade on PFF. I know some people don't care about that, but I think it's probably fair in this case. Rhule's singled him out. He just had a really nice game without being a stat sheet type of guy. And it's going to be players like him that are going to be huge, like in a game like this Saturday. Like if they can just get after Colorado and maybe he doesn't have one catch, but he impacts the game in a big way.
We've just created a new segment called BC Salute of the Week. Each week, you're going to give me a player that you're saluting for doing the dirty work. Yeah,
all right.
Great. Looks good. We can cut it up into a video and everything. It'll be nice. Let's bring Bruntz back into the fold. Patiently waiting. Matt Rhule spoke on Monday. He talked about the Colorado game and essentially said, this isn't our entire season. It's the next game in front of us. What do you think about the tone that he struck on Monday about establishing that, yes, there's a lot of excitement about this Colorado game, but it should be business as usual for Nebraska this week?
No, I thought he struck the right tone. I mean, I think kind of reading between the lines, they felt pretty good about the way things looked on Saturday against UTEP. I mean, yes, it's UTEP. I feel like you have to say that with every mention of the season opener. However, you look around college football, and there were a lot of games where a lot of teams that were favored by a lot of points were in 4-quarter fights for their lives just because of the nature of first weeks. Like, Nebraska came out, when UTEP scored to make it 7-7, there was kind of like this feeling of like, okay, how are they going to react to this? Because it was, that touchdown was sped up. It was like they had the whole drive on fast forward, and Nebraska handled it as you would expect a veteran team to handle it. That's to say, though, I think that Nebraska came out of that game feeling pretty good about the way what they put on film and the way they played. And going into this Colorado game, there's obviously a lot of intrigue locally. People are very cheesed up about it, for a number of reasons. And I think Matt Rhule kind of said, hey, look, like this is we're slow building this year. This isn't the whole season. Acknowledge that they need fans to show up in a big way. Gave credit where he needed to Colorado, I think. Probably hoping to avoid any potential bulletin board material, which I think he did a pretty good job of. And that was the day. I mean, it was kind of it was a little bit like running out the clock in the fourth quarter as far as press conferences go, and just kind of getting out of there. That's kind of what it felt to me. But I do know and get the sense that they understand how big this game is over there. Like, I think they get it. They really get it.
BC, you got thoughts?
Yeah, I thought Rhule was very shrewd and sidestepped any landmines. Because if I were him and a lot of people were him, there's some stuff from last year that was said which would really get under your skin. But he didn't go there, was smart not to go there. And I thought was very respectful of the talents that Colorado has, which is warranted. I mean, Shedeur Sanders is just a tough dude. Like, I mean, Nebraska hit the crap out of him last year, and he got up and he threw for a ton of yards by the end of the game. So you have to have massive respect for them. I thought it was interesting how everybody knows about Travis Hunter, but he highlighted like 3 other wide receivers that make that operation very difficult to defend. And I think that's the truth there. So it was like what Bruntz said. It was, don't say anything you're not supposed to say. It was a veteran coach knowing how to handle a week like this. And that's going to be a big storyline. Can they make this not be a read out around the world week? They don't even know that reference, but we do, within their walls. Well, it's going to be outside of the walls like that. And if they can do that, they'll probably be fine Saturday. But that's always a big challenge in a game like this because everybody knows how big it is, even if they can't say it or pretend it's not.
Sticking with BC here, what else did you pick up from Rhule news and notes kind of as we move forward after week 1 into week 2, sort of where this team is, some of the performances he saw, and then, maybe some guys we didn't see as well?
Yeah, I think the massive headline was really the Malachi Coleman thing. That he could redshirt. That's sort of, it seems like the plan if they can play it that way. If that all works out, that's a beautiful bridge that you built where, Malachi has the experience from last year, but you look at the depth chart, it is difficult right now because there just happens to be 2 really veteran, good, big-bodied receivers. I think it's easier for Husker fans to process it because both Banks and Nayor played like they did Saturday. Had it been a game where maybe one of them didn't show up at all on the stat sheet or have a play, maybe people are still like, oh, what's that about? Like with Malachi, And so I think it makes it easier to understand as they saw the receivers and how deep it is. And so that's really interesting though, when you think about a player like Coleman and his star status coming in here. And obviously he made some plays last year. And if he's accepting and can do that and play 4 games, and Bruntz, correct me if I'm wrong, but a player would get how many ever games in the postseason, right? Beyond the 4?
Yeah, the 3 games. So anything in the playoffs, anything in bowl game wise is I think you could potentially play 8 or 9 games if your team made it far enough.
So you're saying Malachi's still going to get to play 8 games is what you're getting at.
Yes,
I don't think the conference championship counts, right? Like that one, that would still count towards the 4.
That counts towards the 4, I believe.
Right.
And then anything after the conference championship, it's just chaos. So
Nebraska can trot them out for game 1 against USC and then just run, rip off the next however many games from that point forward.
Yeah, yes. 7 or 8 games, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I was very fascinated what was going to happen with Malachi because he is just kind of a really raw wide receiver. I think there was a hope that he was going to go from someone who had a lot of athletic ability in just one off season and just be this polished wide receiver product. And I don't think it was ever going to work like that. But now you have guys like Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nayor that he's been able to watch those guys work every day since January, see what they do. And they have had success in college football. They had success in week 1. I think we're going to look back on the additions of Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nayor, both as big for what they did on the field, but also for how they've helped shape that wide receiver room for what's yet to come. I think they're such hugely important role models that Garrett McGuire can kind of just point to. And they've embraced that role on top of all of it. I waxed poetically about this wide receiver room since the spring, and it just feels like so many of these pieces have fallen into place really nicely. And oh, by the way, you had somebody like Carter Nelson showed up and looked like he wasn't out of place on a 11-man football field on Saturday as well. I want to get back to Matt Rhule real briefly. Michael Bruntz, I want to mention this. He didn't talk about him so much on Monday, but he talked about him last Thursday, and we haven't really discussed him on the podcast much. The news broke last week while we were on here. What do you think the Mac Markway addition means, just based off of what Matt Rhule had to say? And do you think there's a chance we could see him in November because he would be eligible to play 4 games and still redshirt him as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting addition. I think, he's probably a bit behind the 8 ball, given that he showed up, during the first game week and hadn't practiced. But Matt Rhule said it a couple times, that they've got experience in having to get guys up and ready on short weeks from their time in the NFL. You sign a guy earlier in the week and you have to get him ready for Sunday. There's probably an art to that, and they've got experience doing that. So, I wouldn't put it out of the question that they would be able to get some kind of package or, get him some things that he can do relatively easily. And maybe you see him later in the year. I guess kind of the question is whether he gives you significantly more than, what you have from guys that are on the roster now. I mean, he walked by us on the sidelines. I mean, he looks like you would hope a college tight end looks like, at 6'4", 6'5", 250. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting piece, and certainly, I think they would, like to redshirt him if possible. But I mean, as they've shown, the guy can help him. They're going to try to get him to 4 games. So I would not be surprised to see him at some point, just because I think there's a window there where he can help you to do something this year, and especially once they get into conference play and you have to lean on your depth a little bit more.
BC, I wanna jump back to running backs here for a minute. We saw basically the top 4 guys, the oars, if you will. All 4 of them played against UTEP. Do you think that all 4 will play against Colorado this upcoming weekend?
Yeah. I think it'll be less even. I think there's going to be like 2 who separate in like the touches category. But I do think you'll see all 4 in some respect. I mean, I think Dowdell's a really interesting story from the first week. I know with the fumble, obviously, but he ran really well. And I didn't know what to make of him leaving the spring. I know like early on he was trying to play catch up, and then he had the big run like in the red-white game. But I sort of thought it was just a really well blocked play where a lot of guys would have scored on it. And I still think that. So it wasn't like I was like, okay, that's a big deal. But I thought he made a really good first impression in that game. So what's interesting is you basically do have 2 sets of twins, like you've got Ramir and Emmett, who are very similar in their games, I think. And then you've got Dante and Gabe, who sort of do the same stuff. But if you can, if you can keep the beach ball in the air and everybody is happy enough, and like, unfortunately, someone is probably going to have a setback of some sort, and you're going to need somebody who maybe didn't play as much in September to play in October, November. You actually do have a really nice setup as far as depth. I think what was encouraging is we've always said, okay, they're good at running back, but are they great? Like they were the higher end of good in the first game, I thought. Like I wouldn't say like, you were just like jaw on the floor about anybody, but I thought it was the upper middle part of what you can be. And I think that's what people liked.
Bruntz, I want to ask you about Nebraska's, defensive backfield. You've got Colorado coming in this next weekend with Jimmy Horn Jr. and Travis Hunter, Shedeur Sanders. Matt Rhule talked about some of the other wide receivers and weapons that they have in that passing game. We didn't get to see a lot against UTEP because, again, it is UTEP. How do you feel about this secondary? Because a lot of conversation was spent this spring about who's going to be opposite of Tommy Hill, what's that going to look like. How are you feeling about the secondary ahead of what could be one of its toughest matchups of the season?
Yeah, I mean, the price of poker is going up. I mean, I don't know that we learned a ton from this past week with those guys. I mean, you had, the interceptions, they gave up the touchdown run, or the touchdown pass as well. But I mean, the starters were in for what, maybe 20 snaps. What was the total, Brian? Like mid-20s.
Yeah, basically.
So I don't know. I mean, I think I'm eager to see if Nebraska does anything differently coverage-wise with Colorado, because I think you kind of have to. I don't know that you can give those guys 10-yard cushions and expect to, come out of there successful. So, I think we're going to learn a lot about that group. I feel good about the top end of the secondary. But, it's going to be a lot of eyes on Tommy Hill, as it should be. I mean, you had the conversations about, him being a potential first rounder before the start of the season. Obviously, Pro Football Focus loves him and what he did last year. And I think, this is the type of game that if you're able to play well, it's the type of game that they reference when you get drafted. It's the type of game that they show highlights wise, as they're talking about you, and you're, finding out where you're going for training camp. I mean, look, that's the kind of game it is for him. So I don't think we learned enough about Nebraska's secondary. I think we're going to learn a lot about them this week and kind of how they can handle a very good Colorado offense.
let's transition here for the final few minutes of the podcast. A short one today. We've got kind of a tight schedule to try to get everything in this week, but we will be back with a Husker247 Hypecast. Not that anyone needs any extra hype for that Colorado game, it seems like, but we're going to provide it. We're going to get you even more hyped than you thought that you could. That'll be later this week. But I do want to finish with a little recruiting here. Nebraska will have Dawson Merritt, the Alabama commit that they came down to as a finalist, Nebraska and Alabama, for the linebacker out of Kansas City. He is going to be on campus on Saturday. He wants to get eyes on Nebraska in person. He said he wants to spend time around that staff, and then he wants to reconfirm his belief that it's secretly Patrick Mahomes dressed up at quarterback for Nebraska and that Dylan Raiola may not be a real person. So he's looking to confirm that. We'll see how that goes for him. Also, Cortez Mills. Remember that name? You remember all the way back in January, we were writing about guys that could end up in Nebraska's class, players that, they want to add because of their talent at wide receiver. Cortez Mills is committed to Oklahoma, and he is going to be at Nebraska this weekend. Almost as if some of these guys that committed elsewhere, Nebraska is like, okay, we'll see you in September. And that's kind of what might be what's happening here. And they may not be the only one. So we'll see what else is added throughout the week. We know that they're going to have a big visit weekend. Michael Terry expected to be in Lincoln as well. So a lot of talent in Lincoln. We know there's going to be more visitors kind of added throughout the week. Bruntz, do you think that VIP area is just going to be overflowing there in the north corner of the stadium now?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like when guys visited in June and then they had that visit day in late July, and even like guys that came for like the red-white game, it was like, oh, you planning on coming back? And like it felt like everybody was like, I'm going to be there for Colorado.
For the Colorado game.
That was the game. That was even before it was a night game. Like, so yeah, it's going to be packed. And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I mean, Cortez Mills especially, that's not nothing. I mean, Oklahoma does not typically enjoy their commits taking visits elsewhere. Like it's kind of a verboten, I guess, that they don't do.
Look
that.
at you.
So, yeah.
Freaking show off.
Yeah.
So
just drop that in there. Like you knew how to pronounce it and everything. Didn't even have to think about it.
But no, I think that's one to follow. And I think, as we've been saying, if Nebraska is able to start quickly and put some wins together on the front of this season, there's some potential for that class to look significantly different than it does at the start of the season. So this is all part of that. I mean, you basically have two guys on campus that if they were Nebraska players next year would potentially be on the field next. I mean, like that's the level of talent you have coming in for this weekend already.
It cannot be overstated just how vital it is for Nebraska's recruiting operation that they have a guy like Dylan Raiola that is so public. They just haven't had anybody like that. I really can't think of the last Nebraska player that would be so well known. And he's well known on a different level, too. I mean, he's well known where you have Patrick Mahomes tweeting about him. He's well known where you have these high school kids that have gone to camps and have caught passes from him already are familiar with him. It's just such a unique opportunity that I think it just opens a lot of doors. I mean, Nebraska could have had the same performance if Kyle McCord was the quarterback. I don't think these guys are showing up necessarily for this Nebraska-Colorado game. Like it is really unique to see this play out. And I'm fascinated what it's going to look like when we get to transfer portal season.
I think Kyle McCord had a good week, didn't he? Didn't he play well?
I have no idea. I have no idea what Syracuse did.
He's dead to you?
Well, no, I mean,
Nebraska wasn't pursuing transfers. You guys know that.
Well, we don't have to relitigate what happened with Kyle McCord, but I'm just saying, I don't know if Dawson Merritt and Cortez Mills are necessarily showing up in Lincoln committed elsewhere if Dylan Raiola is.
No, I understand.
That's my thesis. You guys can take it to shreds if you
your
like.
Your point is well made. Nebraska has never had a player like this since the recruiting industry or eras since it's covered like this, like where obviously this is a program that's had tremendous players that people knew across the country in the glory days, but not like this in this era of college football where recruiting is what it is and it's covered the way it is. So it is completely different and foreign to us.
I'm looking up Kyle McCord. He had a 4-touchdown, 354-yard day against Tim Albin and the Ohio Bobcats. If you remember Tim Albin, I think he was a running backs coach and was once a passing game coordinator on that reshaped staff back in 2003, maybe. That's what I remember about Tim Albin.
Yeah.
The Bobcats are they lost their quarterback. They lost a lot of guys last year. They're in rebuilding mode. Kyle McCord caught him at the right time.
They're quarterbacks with your boy Kurt Cignetti at Indiana, I think.
That's Cignetti to you, pal.
Yeah. Cignetti, I don't know. Confetti. What do I care? He's going to win some games.
If you were a recruit, though, even if you're committed somewhere, wouldn't you want to go to this game just to go to it?
I'm a 37 or 36-year-old professional sports writer. I want to go to this game. Yeah, I mean, this is fantastic. This is the most excited I've been to cover a Nebraska home game in a long time because I have no idea what's going to happen, but that atmosphere is why you want to be there in person. It'll look however it looks on TV. It'll sound how it sounds on TV, but it is one of those rare, this is why you want to be there in person type games. That's
what I'm excited about is Rhule and his staff. Like he always references the last year's like first night game against Northern Illinois. Like it's going to blow them away. It will. Like it's going to be like 10 times that, I mean, it's just going to, and I know they've been in big environments and stuff like that, but he doesn't have to worry about that Nebraska nice thing. That's not going to be part of the equation. And I think people know what I mean with that. It's not, hopefully people don't say stupid stuff. There'll be somebody who does, but hopefully 99.9% know what to do. And it's just loud. But it is going to be, I think, I say it without hesitation, it's going to be one of the top 5 environments in college football this year. It just will be because the energy that's been built up for this game within the fan base.
I don't think you're wrong. All right, we need to get out. Any final thoughts, Michael Bruntz?
No, I'm ready. I'm ready to get this one going. It's much anticipated.
BC?
No, not really. Bruntz wore black, which is allowed this week, Rhule said, and that's good because it's a slimming color. So I'm glad they didn't outlaw black in the wardrobe within the program walls.
All right. Well, we at Husker247 feel like you should wear whatever you want leading up to this game. We are not ones to judge whatever you want to put on, but we do feel like you should join us at Husker247.com. Plenty of coverage leading up to Nebraska-Colorado. We'll have plenty of recruiting coverage as well. The Hypecast comes later this week. The season resumes tomorrow. You can see how Nebraska and Colorado fare on NCAA 25. We'll have a live broadcast of that tomorrow night. Join me. You can chat it up. We'll get you ready for Nebraska-Colorado here at Husker 24/7.